Hey there everyone, and welcome to the programming channel in here. Now this video has a specific goal in here. The goal is really simple: to make sure that you understand perfectly about the Redux by the end of this video. Yes, that's the only goal we have in here. And really honestly in here, I promise you that if you'll stick around, you'll watch the video till the end, every concept of the Redux will be perfectly clear to you. That's my promise in here. Okay, so stick around. Now let's jump into that, and there are a couple of prerequisites that I really want you to have. Now, one thing that I'll be doing, although Redux in itself is a separate topic, but it works really seamlessly with the React and React Native. That's why I'll be using React as our base ground in here. So I have created a bare minimum React app by using create React app. You might have already heard about it in the official documentation, or if you are into the course series, then you might have already heard about it. Okay. So I have created a bare minimum application which just says welcome to React, nothing else, etc. is being done. And in the package, I have installed the Redux. Now, how I can install it, it's pretty fairly simple. You can just simply run a command that says simply like, let me just show you how you can install that. I hope many of you already know that, but it's fairly simple. You just have to say npm install and then it should be Redux, and make sure you save that. So you have to just run this command in the terminal, and I'm pretty sure many of you might be already aware of it. Okay, so just go ahead, do that in the terminal, and I hope we are ready to rock and roll. Now, moving on to the further things in the React Native, let me just fix that up because we'll need this guy. Okay, so before we move on into the React in here, now if I'll just ask you that if you have to rate the React between 1 to 10, and rating 1 as the easiest one and 10 as the toughest one, you'll rate the Redux between 7 to 8. And I don't blame you for that. Redux is fairly complex with the documentation and the stuff. But one thing is promised in here, that I won't be using those block diagrams because they make things confusing. Things like payloads, the reducer, the action, the complete store, although they are perfectly correct, but they are fairly complex. And as a beginners, they are no good to deal up with. Okay, so let's get started in here. And before I jump into the code, I would like to bring up my iPad in here and would like to talk in general about it. Don't worry, I promised you I won't be doing those block diagrams, so I won't be doing that. Okay, so if you want to learn about the Redux, let's get first started in here. And okay, so this guy is good. Okay, so let's go in with Redux. Okay, so this is our Redux in here. Now, if you want to make a Redux app, or you want to convert your existing app into the Redux, which is by the way a good idea, there are actually 4 steps involved in it. Okay, so just 4 steps, and you have to follow these steps exactly as I'm saying, with the same kind of impact that I'm trying to make in here, and you'll be ready to rock and roll. So the step number 1 is to create a store. Okay, so that's the step number 1. Now, what is this store? Now, we don't need to worry about it right now, what store is, what we call it, what the terminology is. Basically, you just need to have a store. Now, if you want to create a store, it requires 2 pieces of information from you. Okay, just 2 pieces of information. The first one is reducer. Now, don't just get in too much panic in here because it's just a terminology, and I'll explain you what reducer is. And the second thing it requires is a state. Now, in case you are aware with the React, you might be aware with the state variables and everything already. So state is, consider this as an initial state in here. Now, step number 2, the step number 1 is over, and I'll walk you through with the code as well, and we are going to follow exactly the same thing, and this will help you. Okay, so the number 1 thing is store. The second thing is to create this guy, reducer. So let me just write it. We need a reducer. Okay, now how we can create this reducer? And first of all, what is this reducer? Now, reducer is an agent. Yep, the agent that you see in the MI6 or James Bond, it's just an agent. It just does whatever you tell it. Okay, and in order to create a reducer, again, you need 2 things to be done. The first thing is it requires a state, which is again, state is like what's happening right now. Okay, what is there? What is the situation right now? And the second guy is action. So obviously, our James Bond guy is an actionatic personality, and he needs some action to be done, and he needs a state as well, like what is the current situation, and just deploy me there and I'll perform some action. Okay, that's it. That's our reducer. So based on some action given to it, it is going to perform. And now let's come on to the third state. Now, third state is subscribe. Now, subscribe is not like a subscribe on the YouTube, but I think you might want to subscribe onto the channel. But again, subscribe is not that subscribe. Subscribe is something like getting connected to the base. So obviously our James Bond needs some order from the base. Like for example, when to send cavalry there, or do we need some gadgets there? So all these things are connected with the base. So base needs to be subscribed to whatever the activity that James Bond is trying to do. Okay. And if I'll talk about the programming terminology, subscribe just simply means get the current state. Okay, that's all about it. And see, quickly we have moved on to the step number 4. The step number 4 is to take action, or is also known as dispatch. So what is dispatch? Now, dispatch is like some action is being sent to the James Bond. Like for example, hey, get the nuclear codes, kill the villain, or maybe save the day, or save the girl, just like that. Okay, I'll repeat that quickly because after that we are going to jump into the code and you'll see that this is exactly you might want to have all the time. So step number 1 is to create a store which requires 2 things, a reducer and a state. Then we need to, in the step number 2, we need to create a reducer which requires 2 things, the state and action. And again, reducer is our James Bond and it requires 2 things, what state currently it is and what action do we need to take. And the third one is to subscribe to the base, and in this case the base is actually the state. And the final one is dispatch. Dispatch simply means what action you need to take. Okay, I hope you got that. Now I'll be using an analogy of, or analogy, whatever you call that, analogy of Marvel Universe, but you can do that for anything at all. Now also I would like to give it a big star mark in here, and this star mark is simply because I'm not going into too much depth of the React. Now there are a lot of things involved in the React and Redux as well. Like for example, you never change your state, never mutate your state, or create everything into the separate file. But right now we are here to understand the concept first. We can break down everything into the separate file later on. Okay, so now let's go ahead, remove the iPad in here so you won't be seeing the iPad in here. Now this is the bare minimum skeleton of the app that we have in here. I have got a Redux as happened to be 3.6, but doesn't really care in that particular case. So first of all, I have created a new file, redux demo.js. It is completely a blank file created in the source folder. There we go, redux demo.js. So let's write some boilerplate code. I need to see this. Okay, adjusting a few things. Okay, so now we are going to need a simple React, and we are also going to need components. So bare minimum skeleton there, component, and these are all going to come from React. So that's the step number 1. Now obviously, since we are going to talk about the Redux and we have imported the the Redux in our JSON file, we might want to import that as well. And we are not going to import everything in that because this is a bare minimum example in here. We are just going to import create store from here. Now, don't worry about it. What that create store is, we are going to follow exactly there. Now, you might want to take a screenshot of the previous movie because we are going to follow exactly that. Okay. Since I don't have a real estate on the screen to show up the iPad as well. That's why you might want to take a screenshot. Okay. And this is going to come up from Redux. Looks pretty damn good. And I'm going to fill it up with the bare minimum class in here. I have stored it in my CSON snippet file in the my Atom editor. You might want to check another video. I have made a special video for that, how to do that. Okay. And we want a Redux Demo. And there we go. Looks nice. And again, Redux Demo. And there we go. And now if I just go back in here and write something like test, it should be showing up in the app.js. And first of all, let's import, we want to import Redux Demo, and that's gonna coming up from, oops, I need to add a /. I always forget the / part in here. Redux Demo, there we go. And in here, we are gonna say, hey, why don't you just bring Redux Demo in here? Save that. And we got some problem. View is not defined. Okay, my bad, because this needs to be div. You might be wondering why this oops, my bad, why this view is actually coming up, because this view is coming up because this happened to be React Native. And I think div is gonna be good. Okay, I've saved you, and why don't you just reload for me? Okay, div is not defined. Okay, now these things sometimes happened, and okay, my bad. You don't want a capital D. Okay, bear with me, bear with me. This is important in here. And there we go, we have fixed it. Now, we're not going to be doing anything in here, so let's go into our console log so that I can explain you everything. So just go to console log and I can just clear that up. Okay, looks nice. Okay, now time to follow up everything, and we are going to go inside the render, and there we go. We're going to do everything in here. So what is step number 1? Okay, so just bear with me. Step 1 is to create store. So we're going to create store, and that requires 2 things. The first one is reducer, and what it requires a state. Okay, so there we go. So we're going to do the step number 1 really easily. It's just creating a constant here, and we're going to call this a store. Now, in order to create a store, what you need is already defined thing, that is create store, not something that you might haven't guessed there. And it requires 2 things, the reducer and the state. Now I'll call my reducer as just reducer. Okay, and right now the state is actually pace. You might not want to call this as a piece, because it should usually be an object which contains a lot of things in here. You get the point and concept of the state already in the React course. So okay, so that's the step number 1, create a store. What is the step number 2? I need to just okay, and then the second part is step 2, which is to create a reducer. Okay, we have already used the reducer, so we might want to just get a reducer now. And the reducer requires 2 things. It requires a state and it requires action. Okay, that's good. So what it takes to create a reducer, it's very simple. You just have to say constant reducer. This is how you do it. And it's actually basically a function. I could have created a fat arrow function, but that doesn't really bother in us much. And obviously it takes 2 things. The first one is state and second one is action. Okay, I got that. Now what else we can do? Now based on what action is being thrown, it just returns the state based on action is something like a command being given in here, and it's gonna do and perform whatever the command is. For example, let me give you a simple example that whatever the type of the action is. For example, if I just say that action dot type, and bear with me, this is the syntax that you have to follow. You cannot do anything. It is always dot type. I repeat that again. It is always dot type. So if the action type is something equals to maybe like attack. Oops, I'll write that on all in caps because hey, it's an attack. It's serious. Okay, if the action type is attack, then we might want to change the state a little bit in here. Okay, we might want to return something like I can return actually anything, but bear with me, I'll return a specific thing in here, and that is what action you want to take. Now with the action, you might see this word quite a lot, which is payload. Now this word can be anything. This word can be payload, this word can be value, this can be new state, this can be Paris, this can be London. This, you got the point. Okay, so we are gonna just do one thing in here and I'll walk you through. Bear with me in here because we are learning something important in here. And what is the step number 3? And step 3 is we are going to subscribe. I hope you have already subscribed to the channel in here. So how do we subscribe in here? In order to subscribe, we just simply say store.subscribe. There we go, done. Now, but we might want to pass a callback function in here. You can call a function in here. I would like to get a call fat arrow function just because I got to remind that yes, we can do that. We're gonna log in here that store, oops, I need to learn it. Store, I need to learn how to spell in here. So store is now, and we are gonna get the new state of the store, okay? And that's gonna be store dot get state, okay? And that's how to get the state of the store. Okay, I know there are a lot of steps, but these steps are all worth when you're scaling your app. Okay, so step number 3 is done. Okay, and now finally we are back on to the business. Step 4 is to simply dispatch action. Okay, good. Now, how can we dispatch the action? Now, notice in here that our James Bond is in here. Where is it? The step number 1, our store is being created. The store is actually what is the current situation, which is peace, and this is our James Bond in here. Now, James Bond has a function that if the thing attack is being passed to it, he's gonna just do something. Payload is like a command, or he's gonna perform a simple command. Now, our base is also connected. Now, finally, we are going to dispatch some action. So how do we do that? We are going to simply say, hey, just save the day, or maybe something like that. So dispatch. Okay, this is the dispatch. Now, dispatch usually is an object. It can contain multiple things in here. We are going to just do one thing. First one is always type. Yep, there is no exception. First is always type. Okay, and our type is going to be attack. Now, you might be linking in here that, hey, this attack is exactly the same this attack. And yes, you are right. You are exactly right. This is exactly the same. So this is the attack. So we have given it a situation that, hey, if the state actually changes from peace to attack, then what you need to do? We need to send some command as well. And that command is known as payload. Okay. Now, we are going to say right now that if the situation is attack, then we might want to deploy one superhero in here. So our superhero is going to be Iron Man. Okay, I know this is a little bit bizarre, but bear with me. And I'm going to save this. And now there are a couple of errors, but bear with me how the things actually works in here. I'll talk you through with that. Okay. Now we are just doing an action.payload, but we need to do one more thing in here, that if there is no attack, then we are going to simply return whatever general state in here. Now, although I have told you all these steps just like that, but again, there is one small point in here. To understand this, all of this is perfectly good, perfectly correct. But what you might want to do is just move this step number 2, cut that, and move it above the step number 1. Okay, save that. And let me just clear up the message, and I need to just do a mistake in here so that it just automatically reloads, and I'll clear that console. And now our stat is attack. Now, as soon as I save this, notice in here what happens in here. I need to shrink it a little bit. Okay, as soon as I save this, notice now store is now Iron Man. Okay, so what is happening in here? Let me just try to explain it in here by putting one more example, and then I'll walk you through with every code what is being done in here. Okay, so let's just say, let's just copy this in here, that this is one command. If there is an attack, or if there is something known as green attack, then in our payload, we might want to deploy Hulk. Okay, so we are going to dispatch an action that if the type is green attack, then our payload is not going to be Iron Man, then our payload is going to be Hulk. Okay, notice now it's Hulk, but what we are doing in here, we are also managing our Iron Man storage in here. Now, right now, this is not the perfect example. Let me walk you through what everything is happening in here, because this is the post perfect example in here what we have. Okay, so step number 1 is create store. So we have created a store using by taking the help of create store from the Redux. It requires 2 things, reducer and piece. Piece is our current state. Okay, and then we have got a reducer, which is our James Bond, which does whatever it is being told to do. Then on to the step number 1, we create a reducer, and this reducer takes 2 things, what state is in here and what action to perform in here. Now we says, hey, if the state is being changed to attack, or maybe to green attack, then we perform a specific action to be offered in here. Like for example, we just say, hey, action.payload or action.payload. But in here, we are saying now your payload is Iron Man. But in the green attack, we says your payload is Hulk. And in case there is nothing being deployed, like there is no attack or anything, we are just returning the state. We are returning just the piece. Piece is good. And since we are subscribed to the store, we are getting all these things output on the screen because the base should be aware of what is being thrown on the screen. Okay. And finally, dispatch is like sending the commands in there. Pretty good, pretty damn good. Okay. Now, there are a few things associated why people get confused in the Redux is because this reducer guy needs to go into its separate file in the folder of reducer, and this dispatch needs to go into a separate folder, maybe in a separate file at least. So that is why when you have so many files being linked up, it gets a little bit confusing. But this is actually the bare minimum example that I could have thrown up on the screen. Okay. I hope you got everything with the Redux. I know this was a long tutorial, almost 20-25 minutes, but this is the most perfect example of understanding the Redux. Now, one thing that you always have to keep in mind, remember the 4 steps of the Redux. You will never face any problem, but the important part is that step number 2 always comes at the top. This is kind of convenience that every programmer follows. First, always create the reducer, first always create what kind of action needs to be taken down in here. So, okay, so that's a convenience in here. And I'm pretty sure whenever you are going to see now the Redux things, it's gonna make much more sense in here. Okay, maybe I'll create a couple of more videos on the Redux, explaining multiple files, how to break down all of these components into multiple, but that is only going to come up if I'll get enough requests in the comment section. So make sure you do that. And in case you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, do subscribe. I make regular videos. Sometimes I do travel vlogs as well. So sayonara. Bye-bye.